Perhaps there's no depth of discouragement deeper than the one I'm looking at in 1 Kings chapter 19, which our Old Testament people immediately identify as Elijah's slump into discouragement. 1 Kings 9 revolves around 4 people and ultimately, of course, Jehovah God. The first of the 4 is a king named Ahab. He is the classic wimp-out husband. He is the weak-kneed, henpecked husband of this woman he's married to named Jezebel. She is the classic dominating wife. They're sort of the Bonnie and Clyde of the Old Testament. Ahab and Jezebel. Ahab falls apart under pressure, ultra dependent on his wife, and needing her to sort of carry him through. And of course, Jezebel takes matters into her own hands and does the job her way and relies on the flesh start to finish. They're quite a couple. And of all things, they are living in the era of one of the greatest of all prophets named Elijah, on whose life God's hand rests firmly. Now, Ahab, beginning at verse 1, told Jezebel all that Elijah had done. And that just fits Ahab's style. You can imagine it when they're sitting at home, wherever home was, and he sort of whines how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Jezebel doesn't even talk much about it. She just goes into action. And she sent a messenger to Elijah, "So may the gods do to me and even more if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time." Well, that's a biblical way of saying your history. It's only a matter of time. And you have the audacity to kill our prophets. It's curtains. And Ahab doesn't step in, doesn't make any change in the plan. Jezebel leaves that threat on Elijah. And the first 4 words of verse 3 tell us how he handled them. He was afraid. It's the first time you read of Elijah's fear. I mean, he's willing to stand against the gods of Baal, or the god Baal, and all of the prophets of Baal. He is willing to call down fire from heaven on the altar. And there's no fear in front of all of them, but this catches him completely off guard. I don't know if you have ever been there. But if you are ever there, I want you to remember this little talk today. I want you to remember this, more important than the talk. I want you to remember this story. This great man of God is reduced to a heap of self-pity. What had happened to Elijah? Well, I've written down 3, 4, 5 things that I observe. If not written, at least they're implied. First of all, he did not think realistically or clearly. He failed to consider the source. It was an unbelieving woman. He failed to see behind the threat. It was a bluff. He failed to call upon his Lord immediately. There's no prayer. There is nothing but fear and flight. So he failed to think clearly, realistically. Second, he separated himself from strengthening relationships. He even left his servant and went another day's journey. I have discovered that under juniper trees, there's mainly only single beds. Or there's a single chair and it's hard. Almost without exception, I won't say without exception because I can't remember all the times in my life when I've been discouraged, but almost without exception, when I've been discouraged, I have felt all alone. And frequently it was my fault. There were a lot of people who would have come to bring encouragement and even been an advocate, come to my rescue. But you fight those kind of battles alone, unfortunately, and that's what Elijah does. Strong, healthy, honest, realistic friends with arms around us can help us through most of those tedious and tasteless hours. This is why you must keep cultivating your marriage. There's no greater advocate on the planet than your spouse. I came in the door one evening several months ago at the very bottom, and our back door kind of closes automatically on its own. As I walked in, I just stepped away and took my coat off and hung it on a little rack we have there, and the door, boom, closed. And there stood Cynthia. She had known a little of what I was going through and was soon to find out the whole thing, and she just said, "Welcome home." And I immediately sensed, I'm really not alone in this. I have an understanding spirit in my wife of 52 years. I cannot tell you how beneficial that is. Elijah doesn't have anyone. The third thing, he is caught in the aftermath of a great victory. Please remember this, and please keep it ever in mind, because thank God, by his grace, he will give us times of victory. I'm telling you, better than we ever deserve. Wonderful results, or wonderful answer to prayer, or a wonderful breakthrough, or a magnificent provision of some financial need where we were facing an impossible situation, or maybe as a result of your ministry, just a groundswell of obvious spirit-led response. And it's a victory that's like the crest of the wave. And like the wave, it can also crash. I have found that that is one of the most vulnerable times in my life, immediately following great victories. We were taught in the Marine Corps, as soon as you take the hill or the objective, you set up what they call a hasty defense. You don't sit down and break out the rations. You don't sit around and talk about how great the victory was. You instantly set up communication and a guard perimeter. A hasty defense, because in the military we've learned that that's a vulnerable time. When you start strutting your stuff thinking the battle is over, and in fact it may be the first or the second or third of several more to come. He's on the heels of this wonderful victory. Vulnerable time. Fourth, he is physically and emotionally spent. Do not overestimate God's servants. Don't overestimate your own strength. You need rest just like everybody else. You weren't more spiritual because you skipped times of sleep. I think it was Schaeffer, our founder, who made a statement something like this: sometime it is more spiritual to get a good night's sleep than to pray for another hour. Just go to bed. Just rest. Just rest. And if a little medication will help, careful now. So a little medication will help. Little medication ought to be taken. Before we finish our long journey overseas, Cynthia and I usually take a little sleep ease deal that helps us sleep on the plane, and you feel so much more refreshed. You help make that transfer. But I remember the first time I went, I thought, I don't need that. Man, I'm ready. I wasn't worth a toot for about 3 days from the time I got there, that jet lag thing. But this is far worse than jet lag. You keep doing it Sunday after Sunday, Sunday after Sunday, week after week, week after week, bragging about never taking your day off and never taking your vacation. You are on your way to a serious, serious fall. There's an old Greek motto that says, you will break the bow if you keep it always bent. Unstring the bow. Back off. He doesn't do that. And finally, he submits to the beast of self-pity. And so he says to the Lord, it's enough. Take my life. There are wonderful times when the Lord's response to our prayers is, that's ridiculous, in so many words. He does it by just saying no. You know, I'll take your life when it's time. I don't need your prompting. And here's the reason I am not better than my fathers. Whoever said he had to be better than his fathers? Why do we set up these unrealistic goals that, our church isn't growing like the one in that other city, or God isn't using us as mightily as he's using his classmate that graduated with me, whose grades were ridiculously low, and I graduated here and she graduated here, and look at that is not right. You're not calling the shots. Goals are fine, objectives are great, but usually you're wrong and they're unrealistic. And I'm not better than my fathers. I would have said if I'd have been by him, that's right. You don't have to be. You don't have to be better than anybody else. You just have to be you, controlled by the Spirit.